Kia ora, everybody. Richard Clippin here from the Financial Services Council. Very warm welcome to our FSC Connect on this Tuesday, the 31st of August. Wherever you are in the country, a warm welcome. Hope everyone's doing okay in their bubbles and in lockdown. A little bit of hint of glimmer on the horizon, particularly if you're outside of Auckland, and if you're in Auckland, just a hint of a glimmer, notwithstanding the rather intense storms of last night. Folks, we've got a really excellent discussion taking place today. We'll just give it a few more seconds as people come down the internet pipe and join this Zoom discussion. And the way we're going to run today is we'll just talk a bit about some of the findings of the research very briefly. It's my great pleasure then to welcome a fantastic panel, and following that we're going to have a fantastic discussion. As with all of these discussions, it's completely interactive. We're completely on the record. For those of you who are new to Zoom, which I think is probably not many of us after 18 months of Zoom land, if you got questions or you want to make a comment, just use your chat box and your Q&A box. The panel will be on the lookout for some of those discussions, and we'll look to kind of follow the views from the audience together with the conversation that we've kind of prepped as a guideline piece. So perhaps at 3:32, very warm welcome again, and welcome to this discussion. Just to frame it up, I might just spend a couple of moments. This particular bit of research was called KiwiSaver at the Crossroads, and it's part of the Money and News series. The FSC goes into the field on a regular basis, getting insight and data from over 2,000 New Zealanders on a range of different questions. And much of the research that we've released this year, which includes the Generation Rent research recently, how younger New Zealanders are taking to digital platforms, the rise and rise of digital platforms, the Financial Resilience Index, all emanates from the same set of data and research. And so far, I just wanted to acknowledge a few different groups. Firstly, the FSC Research Committee does a fantastic job with all of our research. They help us frame it up. They help us finalise the topic areas, questions. Any FSC members out there who want to join the FSC Research Committee, completely welcome. Just drop us a line. Also wanted to acknowledge our research partner, Trustees Executors, who for now several years have helped us with this research. So thank you to TE. And finally to Core Data, who's our research partner. They're the people who go in field and do the research, help us then frame this up. And within the FSC team, David and Ress and Haley have a huge part to play in turning up what is some really interesting research. So with that, let's just jump into the key findings. And the reason why we wanted to explore this particular topic is, you know, KiwiSaver is now 14 years old. We knew that the default KiwiSaver review was coming up. We know that it's been one of the really great success stories in the New Zealand financial services landscape. And we wanted to understand where New Zealanders were thinking about KiwiSaver. And there are two themes at play going on here. The first one is long-term thinking. So Kiwis are concerned about affording retirement. They know that KiwiSaver is there about their retirement. They know that NZ Super is there as well. But there's an underlying level of anxiety about, will I have enough? And so that plays into the other three themes, or a couple of themes, which is how much should I put away? Is it mandated or not? And what role does KiwiSaver play in my overall retirement planning? And what was really clear out of this research, I'll go into the data in a moment, is that New Zealanders think that KiwiSaver should be mandated. Numbers are well north of 70%. And equally, New Zealanders think that they should be contributing more. And those two things are absolutely linked. Similarly, the numbers are very compelling. If we just jump into 2 slides on, Haley, I might just play that story out a little bit further. So at the top of this slide, I think Kiwi should be able to better manage their own retirement. You can kind of see that's well over 80%. I think that KiwiSaver should be made mandatory for all working New Zealanders. You can see the numbers there coming in at about 78%. I think I'm getting value for the fees that I pay in my KiwiSaver. Obviously, a huge topic of discussion and decision right across the sector over the last few years. And you can see there well over 75%. I think Kiwi should be contributing more, again, well over 70%. And then I think KiwiSaver is fine as it is. There's no need to change, which is also pretty high reading. If we just focus on those first couple of pieces around whose role is it to think about people's retirement, quite clearly it's about New Zealanders having their own determination about how they think and plan and ultimately solve for retirement planning. But there's that kind of connection between work and contributing to KiwiSaver. So all those numbers are well north of 70, and frankly that was reasonably surprising, because we live in a soft compulsion system where, again, we know that most people are putting money into KiwiSaver. Many are putting at the base rate. So there's not this kind of tiering approach with a clear conversation around adequacy looks like this, and in order to be adequate, you need X, Y, Z to be contributed. We know that current average balances are sitting in the region of about $27,000, $28,000. We know the system size is just over $82 billion. So this is a growing system. And so what's become really clear is that the more people are invested in KiwiSaver, and that's not just financially invested, but broadly invested, the more interest they take in the topic, and that's really important. If we just head on to the next slide, this talks about the contribution levels and who's contributing at base rates, and in some cases not contributing at all. You can see on the top left of that bar chart, over 30% are at 3%, 15% at 4%. And then a steady but a small number at 6 and 8 and 10%, and a significant number, 17.4%, are not contributing at all. So that's why this kind of compulsion versus soft compulsion conversation becomes a difficult conversation politically, for sure. It also becomes a difficult conversation because there's trade-offs, but it's certainly one that you kind of have to steer into. Folks, at 3:38, I might leave the overview at that point and head to the panel slide. And the reason to do that is that sitting around our panel, we have a number of senior leaders from around the sector who are really across the specifics of this discussion. A couple of questions have come in. Can we get access to the slides? Absolutely. This full report and the slides are sitting on the FSC website, so feel free to duck in there and you can download the full research, and absolutely commend you to do that. So to the panel, a very warm welcome. I'm not going to introduce them because I've actually asked them to introduce themselves, but to Helen, to Murray, Nigel, Jeff and Clarissa, thank you for joining this discussion. We might go off slides and then go into the broader panel view and say hi to everyone. And I'm just going to wander through the panel to ask them to tell us who they are, where do they work, and ultimately what's their view on this particular topic around KiwiSaver. And Helen, if it's okay, we might start with you.
Great. Hi everyone, I'm Helen Skinner. I'm Head of Emerging Wealth at Craigs. We run 2 KiwiSaver products. We have a traditional KiwiSaver that's your sort of conservative balanced growth kind of KiwiSaver with a few single sector funds from Key Street. And we are a bit different because the Craigs KiwiSaver is a self-select KiwiSaver. So that allows you to choose different fund managers and securities, stocks, shares, that sort of thing. And there's an advisor to help build and manage that. So that's kind of that's really my passion, and one of the reasons I joined Craigs is because of those kind of product sets. Background, I worked for my 20s and 30s in the UK, and I was actually based globally. So I worked with a lot of pension funds around the world and got a really good exposure to see how pension and superannuation products work in different countries and cultures. But I think this is really exciting, this piece of work, and it's going to be really, I think that it's probably reflection of what we think in the market as it is. So it'll be good to dive into some of those topics.
Brilliant. Thank you. Murray.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. My role at Milford's head of KiwiSaver, so that means I get to work with a great team that our focus is deliver the best, our members the best KiwiSaver experience that they can get and help them to achieve their savings goals. We've got about 55,000 members, a bit over 4 billion in KiwiSaver funds under management, which gives us an average balance of around 73,000. So I guess in a way, not being a default provider, our members have chosen us, so they're already quite engaged with their KiwiSaver. And we see that as being a real advantage because that means that they're really open to the conversation. They're already thinking about their KiwiSaver and saving for their retirement. So they're very open and receptive to the messages that we've got to try and help them to achieve their KiwiSaver goals and to ultimately live the retirement that they dream of. So thanks for the opportunity to be part of the panel. Compliments to FSC, TEA and Core Direct on another great piece of research, because I think it raises some really important and relevant issues which we need to have surface so that New Zealanders can be better prepared for retirement. And, I guess if there was a real surprise for me out of the research, it was that 3/4 of respondents think KiwiSaver should be mandated. So, that's something we should explore. And 3/4 of people think that they should be contributing more, but the majority of people are only contributing 3%, so the minimum. So, the question there is why? Why is there a disconnect? So looking forward to being part of the conversation today to explore some of that.
Awesome. Thanks, Murray. And yeah, the engagement piece we'll absolutely come back to. Nigel, welcome.
Thanks, Richard. Welcome, everyone. And thanks for the opportunity to participate in the panel, Richard. Look, I'm the head of investments at Westpac New Zealand, which includes BT, where I think New Zealand's third largest KiwiSaver scheme. BT is the manager of that. And we're one of New Zealand's larger retail funds management businesses. We have a predominantly active investment style, and we predominantly distribute our products through our banking channels, but as well as our relationship with Forsyth Barr. Look, and so I've been in the industry for a long time, longer than I care to remember. Richard was talking about Space Invaders before. I haven't, it was a little bit before my time, but not much. I think this research is fascinating. Actually, I was, like my other panelists, I was, I think, a little bit surprised by the strength of the messages that we're getting from the survey. I think it is very positive, though, that people recognise the importance of saving for their retirement, that we're not doing enough, and that other ways of addressing this problem, are required. I guess the fascinating piece too is then looking at the sort of policy, where this goes from here, the policy discussion, looking at the political leadership and looking at some of the groups who are a bit more vulnerable and how these, types of solutions play through for them. So yeah, very excited to be part of the discussion.
Thanks, Nigel. And of course, it would be remiss of us not to mention the passing of Sir Michael Cullen, who in many ways was the father of KiwiSaver and probably his biggest legacy. So, big decisions ahead. Wasn't easy to start, not easy to make the right choices, but definitely one to steer into. And with that, Jeff, Mark, go to you if I can. And welcome from Queensland.
Yes, coming to you from the West Island. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks, everybody. And we're really pleased to be and continue our association with FSC in regard to the research. This is a really important conversation from our point of view. Do you know that there's already a significant gap in the underfunding of what we're seeing that's come out of the research? I was a bit surprised, but really pleased that there's this willingness to want to have a conversation about the structure of retirement savings in New Zealand. It's almost universal globally that as we're living longer and there's less taxpayers, more reliance on the health system, more reliance on taxpayer-funded pensions and superannuation, that self-reliance is almost an inevitable conversation. And whilst no system is perfect, and The solutions are often complex in how you deal with all of the various parts of people who participate. It's a conversation that we have to have. So I'm really delighted that there's this preparedness to start confronting it. And I'm really looking forward to see how the conversation goes, not only today, but in the weeks and months ahead.
Thanks, Jeff. And look, we'll pick up on your experience because Australia runs a slightly different model, is slightly older, but interested in the process that took place there. But before we head there, Riz, welcome, and your perspective on this, being really close to the research, part of the FSC team, and also part of on our last conversation, part of the Generation Rent community in terms of how KiwiSaver plays into your future. So, yeah, tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks, Richard. Really happy to be here, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Clarissa, or Riss, and I'm a content manager at the Financial Services Council, and essentially what that means is I lead our consumer communications and projects. I also run point on our strategic research committee, so I'm very, very much immersed in this research and also how it links in to other research that we've done, like Richard mentioned, the research on generation rent. We also did some research into micro-investing and technology and how Kiwis are interacting with new platforms earlier in the year. So I've just got a bit of that context, and also am an Aussie, which I don't always like to admit. In New Zealand, I try to keep it on the down low, but I've got experience under the Australian superannuation system, and also here with KiwiSaver, and currently saving for a first home and using KiwiSaver to do that. So hopefully can bring a bit of a different perspective to the panel, and looking forward to it.
Thanks, Riz. Helen, might go to you first. Just that kind of overall thematic that's playing through feels like New Zealanders are really up for a discussion about the future of KiwiSaver. I mean, what's your sense of that? What was most surprising that came out of the research in your view?
I have to say, when it comes to surprising, and maybe I'm a bit pessimistic, but I wasn't actually surprised by a lot of the numbers that came out of it. I think that, as I say, seeing how pension markets develop through other nations, I think we're actually following a very similar trajectory in the way that investors think and how they're kind of following their investment cycles. I think that a lot of the themes in the research played into actually a research piece that the FSC did this time last year on advice, and that I think it was around 20% of New Zealanders get financial advice. And so I think a lot of the themes that came out around confidence, do they feel confident in meeting retirement goals, the elements around switching, that sort of thing is all tied in, I think, to advice. So so I think that the themes of the research were aligned, particularly around compulsion. We actually hear a lot about that with our investors as well when we're talking to them, when we're doing educational seminars and that sort of thing. So it ties into the noise, I think, that we're hearing on the ground from our clients as well.
Helen, when you're in your client seminars, what plays back? What are the themes around compulsion and adequacy, and how much should I save? Well, what tends to come back in those discussions?
It tends to be that, and I think it came out in the research, that there's a swathe of New Zealanders who just don't know what it is, what does good look like when it comes to KiwiSaver. How much should they be investing? They 3, 4, 8% means nothing. It's all around how much do I actually need at the end point, and then working back from that. When I was in Aussie, spending time in the supermarket over there, $1 million was thrown around all the time as the amount that you needed to have a comfortable retirement, a good retirement. And I saw in the research here, we reference back to the Massey stats, which talked about, I think it was around 750K for a single person and 1.4 mil for a couple, and that was to have a comfortable retirement. But comfortable in that definition was to be able to eat meat now and then and to have a holiday. It's not a huge level of comfort. It's basically probably the standard that most Kiwis will be looking for. So most of the things we get from our investors is around how much do I need, and then it's around how am I going to get there. So, and it's really basic things that we're teaching them as well,
Because that is, Murray, I'll go to you on this one, because that is the challenge, isn't it? There's a contribution at the front end, which for most people has got zero bearing to what you end up with, because it's so far into the future on one hand. On the other hand, it's like I really don't know. How do we make this conversation around preparing for retirement kind of a bit more real for New Zealanders? And what's the experience that you've seen at Milford?
Yeah, look, I think this is one of the things the research really bore out of it. New Zealanders don't really feel well prepared for retirement. And that's not surprising, I don't think, because it's just not a conversation we have. It's not a broad discussion, talking money, it's not a Kiwi thing. We don't really talk about money and finances. And so, people, they haven't had it's almost taboo. And therefore they feel we've got a low level of financial literacy. It's not taught in the schools. People don't talk about it in their families or broader. And so the whole question of how much is enough, how much do I need to prepare for the retirement that I've dreamed of, and Helen referenced the Massey figures. These figures for some people will be quite scary, and that's for a no frills or a just a comfortable retirement. If people dream of retiring and doing all the things that they would loved and wanted to do, with travel, play golf, play bowls, charity work, whatever it is. The research bore out that a lot of Kiwis, older Kiwis, are going to have to work longer than well into their retirement age, into their 70s. And so, I think that's an issue. We as an industry, we can help people by educating them. And, we do the same thing in our seminars and the advice that we provide to our clients. The biggest question we get is people just don't know how much they need to save. And for some people, when you talk the numbers, it can be quite scary and quite daunting, almost to the point where it puts them off. So I think, the research is a good start, but for us as providers and as an industry, the real key thing is that how do we take this and package that up so that Kiwis can get better prepared?
Fantastic. Riss, I might go to you on this same topic, and then Nigel, come to you on some of the policy settings, and Jeff then just round out just bit of the discussion around what has Australia done differently or better than New Zealand and perhaps other jurisdictions. But Riss, maybe to you first. You mentioned the first home buyer piece, but yeah, your perspective on adequacy. How does this generation think about retirement?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And Helen and Murray sort of got me thinking now. And I noticed there was a question from Tony in the Q&A, which was, what is retirement? And I thought that was a really good question, a very seemingly basic question. But I think particularly for younger people, I'm 31, and I think, I'm starting to think about retirement, but I think in my 20s, I definitely wasn't thinking about it. And I think a lot of younger people, they kind of think of retirement as being something that's so far away, and I don't have to think about it now because that's something I can worry about later. And I think part of the literacy conversation, which Murray touched on, I think is actually maybe it's about reframing the way that we talk about it a bit, because I think especially to young people, and probably even to people much older than me as well, when you talk about retirement, it sort of conjures up this image of almost a boring sort of stage of life, whereas in actual fact what we're talking about is retiring comfortably is about continuing this amazing life that you have right until the end, right, even once you stop working. And I think perhaps just reshaping the way we talk about retirement as a concept would really help with that financial literacy piece and helping Kiwis, young and old, sort of understand a bit more why they need to save for it, to continue that the life that they love to live. And also, just interestingly, on kind of related to both Helen's and Murray's point. So Helen, you were sort of saying that how much you need to retire comfortably is so unique and dependent on people's circumstances and situations and what they need and want to be comfortable. And Murray sort of pointed out that, from the research, a lot of people don't know how much that is. And there are different figures being thrown around, and it's really hard to know. And what I found really interesting out of the research, which surprised me in particular, was that those in the 60 plus category of that age group, 35% of those people that we surveyed didn't know how much they needed to retire comfortably. It was about almost 35% of that 50 to 59 age bracket as well. So it's not just young people that don't understand how much they need to retire comfortably. There's a literacy gap across all ages. And I found that really, really interesting. And I think it's something that we need to address.
And I think just to add to that, Clarissa, I think young people are in the best position, right? Because we all know the earlier you start, the better. But young people seem to think that saving for retirement is something that you start doing when you're in your 50s.
Right, yeah.
Thanks, Riss. I might go to Nigel with a couple of curly ones. Nigel, two curly ones. I mean, this research is designed to do exactly this, right? To stimulate debate and to ask questions so we can land in a better place after the debate. So there's a couple of schools of thoughts. One is these are tough political calls to make. But there's also this piece around, and there's been a couple of questions or comments come through on the line around, does net savings actually grow because you put in place a system like this? But both of these are kind of policy pieces which the FSC is actually grappling with at the moment. But what's your observation on those couple of points?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Look, I think you need to be careful in jumping to compulsion is the answer, mandating KiwiSaver is the answer to these problems. Clearly, I think what it has indicated to me is it's a really opportune time for that policy work to occur, to look at the options, to look at the gap, what we need to do, the actions we need to do to save, to address that, retirement savings gap. Now, compulsion should be one of the things that government, potentially look at as part of that conversation, but it shouldn't be the only thing. It's really around looking at, what the levers are, and I think, in particular, it's potentially a pretty blunt instrument. So you need to think through the impact of that on other groups. Maori, Pacifica, low incomes. So there are some real challenges for our political leaders. In terms of, heading down that path. The other thing I think good superannuation policy requires is, a broad consensus on the settings. And, you're heading into dangerous territory in terms of, the politics of compulsion. So, I mean, it really needs to be, founded and based on great research, great policy work from the government.
Yeah, and it is. Sorry, Helen, you go.
Sorry, I was just going to say I agree with that on the point of we need to look at things holistically, particularly when you think that KiwiSaver has been developed for those that effectively are working. So, and I think we've talked about the 17% or so that aren't contributing. As anyone knows who's been in a caregiving or in a parental leave capacity, you're not earning. So there's elements of society which aren't being captured at the moment in the regime. So I think there's definitely a multiple point step to it. But, and forgive me because I can't remember the research, but I saw some research a couple of years ago. It said that when a balance gets to the point of being a reasonably priced car, that's when people start to be more engaged with their investments and start to learn more. And so we're not at that point yet. So
yeah, thanks for all the comments that are coming through. Awesome stuff. I look at Helen on your last point. I recall Susan St. John from the RPRC at Auckland Uni making that point really clear that there are some system pieces around KiwiSaver that really benefit people who are in kind of long-term stable jobs. But if you have a different work pattern and a different job pattern, very different type of conversation. So yeah, systemically it advantages some and disadvantages others. Jeff, I'm going to go to you now if I can, both for your take on this, because you know the beauty about the New Zealand system is we can learn from lots of other jurisdictions. The Aussie system's now sitting at what, $3.2 trillion. It's an absolute beast of a system, huge. What's your take on this difficult dilemma around both the insights from the research, given the settings that we currently have today?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think the first thing to recognise is the Aussie system has now had the opportunity to mature through more than 3 decades. It started out at 3% contribution and then stepped up very quickly once there was broad acceptance in the community on both sides of politics that this was actually a good idea. And then it sat at 9% of contribution for a while. I think the important thing is that it needs a suite of things that you do. So there, you need to look at incentive, you need to look at some inherent protection, and the rationale behind compulsion needs to be connected to something. And by that I mean, in Australia, what it enabled governments to do was to look at a sense of fairness as to when the state could expect to stop funding people who did particularly well out of the superannuation system and those who didn't. And so what you can expect to see over time in Australia is that there will be less and less reliance on the taxpayer because you're able to limit access to some of the funding that you get from government. Of course, that's a big risk for an incumbent government to take now, but there's no reason why you can't start to have that conversation and start slowly as you push towards that. I think just picking up on a couple of observations that have been made, it's absolutely true to say that no one really starts out being engaged with their retirement in their youth. I mean, I can remember when I was 20 when I thought 30 was ancient. So, you know, it's not until you get a decent sum that you start to get that engagement. And you don't know that you're going to start that yourself. So one of the great advantages that we've seen in Australia is that the sense of compulsion, with all of those associated things and levers that you include in it, it gets to a point where, you know, once people start having about $100,000 in there, then they really start to take a keen interest in what they're doing. Now, the one final point to that is, of course, no system is perfect. So there are always going to be trade-offs. So one of the things that we're seeing in Australia, and it's consistent with what we've discussed out of the FSC research in recent weeks, is the entry point to property for our young people. So, you know, if to try and get your deposit to jump into your first property in Sydney or Melbourne is just as prohibitive as in New Zealand. And that's something that I think the Australian system could copy from New Zealand in giving first home buyers a bit of a leg up as far as that's concerned. But it's a really important conversation. Do you know, we started our compulsory super in one of the worst recessions we'd ever had. And in a funny way, that was a better time to have the conversation because things were so broken. And I'm not saying things are broken in New Zealand, by the way, but, you know, perhaps this COVID environment and the increasing awareness that's seeing around money is a really good opportunity for everybody associated with to get it going.
Jeff, when we think about where New Zealanders have their wealth and the relative value of KiwiSaver versus, say, people's property, so it's huge in property and just growing in KiwiSaver, but it's, you know, the research that we've done, when you've got an average balance of 26, 27 grand, you know, the early research we did was, you know, you trade up your white goods, you buy a new car, maybe go on a trip, and then you spend your KiwiSaver, and as long as you've got other assets. In the Australian model, the average balance now in super's pretty high, right? And there are requirements to take your your superannuation as a pension, if you will. Just perhaps any comment you have on where do most Aussies have most of their assets, property versus business, say, versus KiwiSaver? Any insights there?
Yeah, sure. So Australian property is currently sitting around 7 to 8 trillion, whereas the superannuation system is sitting at 3 trillion. No one's really been able to look at values in small business, but if you look at the disproportionality between the managed investments, including KiwiSaver, in New Zealand, sitting around 240 billion, say, versus 1.6 trillion in property. That to me just highlights the gap, but also the need for us to have this conversation, about confronting that gap, because those people who aren't in property yet, right? That the gap in between that cohort and this one is only going to get bigger. And I completely accept it's a hard conversation to have, because you're pushing people into something that they're not necessarily able to have that intellectual connection with. But it is sort of a greater good nation building type thing that you're doing.
Thanks, Jeff. Murray, I might go to you, just picking up just that earlier theme around who benefits most out of KiwiSaver, and is the system set for all New Zealanders kind of equally, both at the vulnerable customer end, but also at the very well-to-do end. So I wonder whether you had any particular comments on, if we were going to make any changes to KiwiSaver to take care of those that are more vulnerable in our community, but also perhaps find a way so that the very well-to-do who already have other mechanisms of savings. What would you change? What would you do differently? What's the research telling you?
Yeah, look, it's a really good point. Look, I think at first we should acknowledge that KiwiSaver has been hugely successful. It's been the best financial product and savings product that New Zealanders have seen. So 3.1 million Kiwis in at 82 billion, as you referenced. But it was originally created as a middle market product. And as you say, Richard, there's a cohort for which even, let's say contribution rates are as low as 1%. That would be a real stretch. So 3% is just too much for the household budget. And they're probably the ones that need it the most. So for people that might be under financial strain, they might be on lower incomes, they're living week by week, to move to compulsion for them, could be a big jump in their household budget. So I think you need to look at all of these things together and say, if we were going to move to compulsion, and I'm not saying we should, but it's part of the discussion we should be having, what are the other settings that need to change so that we're not putting too much financial strain on people that really can't afford it? So what would a change? Well, there might be a two-step process to get to compulsion. One of those options could be looking at compulsory employer contributions. So for people that are earning, their employer is making some contribution. Now, we need to be careful we're not putting too much impost on employers who already have a lot of strains, and increasingly more so given the current economic environment. But there could be some tax trade-off or some tax relief there from the government on those contributions. If an employer just put $20 a week into an employee's account, they'd get to the $1,040. So they'd get the government contribution as well. So $1,500 per annum contributed to a KiwiSaver account. If, let's say, you're working for 45 years, if you assume a balanced return of, say, 6%, that's $180,000 at age 65 of somebody over their working life who hasn't put in a dollar of their own. That was assuming that you had the current settings where you'd still get the government contribution, because I think these are other things to consider. If we went to compulsion, those incentives like government contributions would probably disappear. So look, there's a number of angles you can look at it, but I think for the more vulnerable, it's a challenge we need to carefully consider. And then, as you mentioned, there is a cohort that are getting these benefits who are already financially well off, and KiwiSaver is going to be a very small part of their financial assets.
Yeah. Nigel, you're taking that question?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's very much aligned, with Murray. I think you need to look at the, the more vulnerable groups, as we've talked about. We've talked about KiwiSaver fundamentally being a work-based superannuation scheme. So it does benefit people more who are in consistent work and particularly on higher incomes. So solutions like compulsion may solve some problems, but they also create lots of other issues for those other groups. So I think they absolutely need to be considered, and employers need to be part of that conversation. I think looking back at the Australian experience, a lot of that was led by the employer contribution. Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong. The way that was sort of stepped up over time, so it was in lieu of pay increases. Look, I think there are a range of different options there, and it needs to be, properly assessed by the policymakers, weighing up all these different factors before jumping to the solution.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nigel. Sorry, Jeff, you're about to jump in?
No, just to say, I don't think compulsion by itself is a good idea. I think you need to look at, all of the factors that contribute to it. In Australia just recently, they've introduced a cap on the amount of money you can have in super, along with incentives so that instead of spending it all in one hit, you do take it out in pension phase. And so to me, that's a good example of some of the levers that you can apply at various cohorts to try and have as much fairness in the structure as you can, because if it's too blunt, you end up with having, this separation between winners and losers. So that's why it's such a complex thing to have to talk around.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to go to the couple of topics now. Well, one on financial literacy, kind of / engagement, sort of about advice. Helen, I might start with you on this because, it is true, isn't it? The research is pretty clear, not only this research, but previous research, around the more engaged people are with their investments, and in this case, KiwiSaver, they're kind of they end up in a better position making smarter and wiser decisions. Is that true, or is that the experience you have at Craig's?
Definitely the experience that we have. I was actually going to quote you, Richard, because I think when the last piece of research came out, you were talking about, I'm going to put it down, about a 25-year-old who gets advice and is investing $2.5K a year, that the research showed that by the time they were 55, they were $1.5 million better off of those that got advice versus those that didn't. That's about right. But yeah, we absolutely find that and it's not just around being financially better off, but a huge part of it is being confident in having that sort of financial acumen, and effectively it does affect mental health as well, and just being feeling better about your life and being more in control. So I think there's still an element in the New Zealand market that that advice is seen as being something that is only for the wealthy, that it is something that costs a lot, or you've got to have a lot of money to be able to get it. And I think we as an industry need to do better to provide that advice and to really let people know that if you're in a KiwiSaver, the chances are you've got access to financial advice and it comes as part of the package. We have all of our advisors at Craig's are financial advisors, and they've all, they've got experience that goes with that. And I think we're in a sweet spot at the moment, particularly with KiwiSaver, because we've had 13 years or so of an upward market, and we found, in contrast to the rest, or to a lot of others providers out there, that when the wobbles happened at the last year when the COVID first hit, we didn't get a huge number of clients calling in, or our switching numbers were really low of clients that were moving around. And I put a big part of that down to the advice that they're getting and the knowledge that they're getting at the start of the journey. So I think it's something that we have to do better as an industry. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Helen. And the kind of advice, I mean, we're obviously talking KiwiSaver here, but I mean, advice is broader than that, right? It's should I fix or float my home loan? Should I take out appropriate insurance? Do I need health cover? Where should I invest? Because I got I got a gift from my grandparents, that kind of thing.
It is. It's around, what do you do when you've got a change in life circumstances? And I think in the research it talked about switching numbers, and I think it was around 11% or 12% that switched to a lower rate due to COVID. That may be because of change in circumstances. There's people, particularly those that have lost employment over this period, that need to do that or may need to do that, or would people do, their lives change, and we need to make sure that their investments change with it. So or that they're at least comfortable in it. So and I think the other elephant in the room is term deposits. We've got Kiwis love property and they love term deposits, and there's 200. Oh, actually, I've got the number there. We've got 207 billion in term deposits at the moment. And I think we also need to be asking the questions at that point and making sure that clients are making those decisions for the right reasons as well.
It's kind of interesting. We might come back to that in our research conversation of last week. We were talking about, I don't know that it's lazy cash, but there's certainly a wave of cash sitting on the sidelines. Maybe it's security, maybe it's rainy day money, but we're all locked down on level 4. I'm just craving to go and buy a coffee made by somebody else. But all of that stopped, right? So if it's all stopped, it's not happening anywhere. And that oxygen through the economy obviously is a different question. Rhys, I'm going to go to you on this same topic if I can. Sorry if I jumped over someone there, but Rhys, just over to you on this topic of literacy, because you spent a lot of your role is communicating with the New Zealand community, and you kind of see the research starkly. Plus, a bit to your earlier point, your generation, is getting on the property ladder. They're more at the start of their life stages. What's your take on how confidence and how important literacy is in helping you and more generally this cohort making good wise decisions?
Oh, yeah, I think it's hugely important. I think a lot of people don't really know where to go or where to start, and I think being able to just know that there are support services there. There's so many resources out there, plenty of which are free, that you can start with, and then you've got the advice part of it as well. But I think just being able to communicate that, and that's sort of something that we're trying to do at the FSC at the moment, is sort of we did a bit of content around where you can go to get information and learn a bit more about managing your money in general, but also about planning for retirement. And it's something that I think a lot of people need to do, but are potentially not very interested in doing. And I think when we try to educate people, we need to kind of do it in an engaging way that really appeals to, like I was saying earlier, like the fact that we all want to live a great life and a comfortable life even after we finish working. But yeah, I think it also comes down to not just financial literacy and developing those capabilities and that knowledge, but just talking about this stuff that I think so many people just don't talk about. I think it might have been you, Murray, that mentioned that earlier. Particularly young people, I noticed that. I talk about this stuff all the time at work with colleagues and my partner, but not so much with friends or flatmates. And it's just something that I think if more people talked about and it was normalised, it would sort of help with that literacy. I just actually came out of a meeting with our diversity and inclusion committee, and we were talking about how we can sort of boost the financial capability of women in particular. And we all know that women are not as well off in retirement as men for a whole host of reasons. And one of the things we're actually talking about is that, women, we talk about all these things with our friends, and we ask for advice from our friends about a whole range of different things. But money doesn't really seem to ever come into it. So it was a really interesting conversation to have. So I think it's, yes, financial literacy is such a big part of it. But I also think just talking about it in general is also huge, particularly for my demographic.
Riss, we were talking on our last, sorry, Helen, I know you want to jump in there. Just a quick one to Riss. We were talking in the launch of the micro-investing platforms being much bigger take-up rate by the under 40s, and that, you know, the Sharesies generation or the micro-platform generation, Helen, you were on your awesome panel just recently, you know, is almost a way to engage a whole new generation. Whilst it's not necessarily a KiwiSaver conversation, it is a money, it is an investing, it's a broader money and you piece, isn't it? Perhaps Riss, to you first, then to Helen, and then we might just jump into the COVID piece just briefly. Sorry, Riss.
Yeah, definitely. I think something that Sharesies in particular have done really well, I think the way that they communicate, and they sort of have made this idea of investing and the share market so engaging and suddenly almost trendy and exciting for young people who previously sort of probably weren't too interested in it, to be honest. So I think that's the big thing that they've done, and other platforms as well. It's not just them, but yeah, I think there might be something in there that we could sort of take from that as an industry, as a sector, and kind of go, okay, perhaps when it comes to KiwiSaver, we just need to talk about it in a more engaging way, in a way that makes it accessible to people. Yeah.
I might just add to what Clarissa's saying there, because those platforms, you know, it's a technology solution, and I think that's where KiwiSaver can really make some big leaps forward, is using the technology that we've got at our fingertips. And you know, banks have apps. We've all got apps. We've got online platforms we can be putting information through. We've got a tool called Forecast My Balance. It's one of the most used tools. But the message there is, like, it'll forecast what your balance could be at age 65. But more importantly, what does that mean in retirement? So what's my weekly income or my annual income going to be off the back of this money? And in our seminars, we try and teach people the 10 by 2 rule, which is just a simple way to work out 5%, right? So if people are going to consume their retirement savings at 5% per annum, take your KiwiSaver balance, whatever it is today or whatever it is you think it's going to be at age 65, divide it by 10 and divide that by 2. So if it's $100,000, your 100,000 becomes 10,000, that becomes $5,000 per annum. That's what it's going to provide you as an income at age 65. Assume you're going to live for 20 years. You're going to use that money up. So, it's about breaking it down into simple messages, not only for the young people, but for the older cohort as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Murray. Folks, mindful that we've got 7 minutes to go, probably got a last question to ask everyone. Helen, were there any burning points you wanted to make on that last one?
Oh, I just wanted to say that we run women's wealth workshops, sort of a women's wealth series sort of thing, and it's aimed, just getting back to Riss's point about women in particular, and we find that women end up coming and asking for advice only when there's major events in their life, which is a partner's died, they're going through a divorce. It's generally it's not a natural thing that we kind of talk about. So I think that getting to Riss's point, that we can definitely do more to try and engage and make it part of a normal conversation, across the board.
Fantastic.
And Jesus and Hatch have done that.
Fantastic. Folks, I'm going to close with asking everyone kind of a last question, which is 2 things. If you had a magic wand and we were sitting here in 10 years' time, what would have changed? What would be different? And then we'll close it out. And we might go in reverse order. Jeff, your take on that. Magic wand, 10 years' time, what would you change and what would it look like? You're on mute. I'm sure you're saying some great things.
My apologies. There would be a combination of incentives across the various cohorts that are setting Kiwis up for more self-reliance as they move into retirement. I would see you being halfway through the journey at best in terms of what needs to happen. It does take quite a long time for this sort of thing to mature.
And the challenges in Australia, a bit to your earlier point, when there's that much money, it's funding infrastructure, it's investing in local companies. There's a whole other world of opportunity that opens up, isn't it?
Yeah, superannuation funds in Australia now are mainstream funders for most of the infrastructure projects going on across the nation. So there are flow-on benefits that you don't see emerge for 20 years plus. But it's why it's such an important conversation to have now. It's really exciting. Great time for New Zealand.
Thanks, Jeff. Nigel, Magic Wand. What's your view on it?
Well, look, we'd all have high balances. There would be no retirement gap. We can solve all problems with a magic wand, can't we? Look, more seriously, I think, awareness, literacy, those sort of things, hopefully we've made some really good progress around that. I think incomes are also another, hopefully we can drive incomes up over time. But I think in terms of, our retirement settings, we need to have that debate. We need KiwiSaver to evolve to solve the retirement gap, and we need some real political leadership, I think, to help face into those and into some difficult decisions. And there will be some, different solutions required for different groups. Would be the way I would see it.
Nigel, do you think COVID's going to help that? Just to Jeff's earlier point, I mean, we're in a pretty tough place right now. Do you think COVID will help make it easier to have these tougher conversations?
Yeah, look, I mean, I guess that remains to be seen. I mean, certainly it may impact the government's ability to fund the current superannuation settings, out into the future over time. It's early days in terms of COVID. I mean, certainly there are more conversations around well-being, and I think that's a positive thing. I don't think it's really triggered, a strong movement in terms of, literacy or, crisis type decision making yet in that context. And I think it would be tough to put it onto businesses at this point.
Fantastic, thank you. Murray.
Well, 10 years' time, I mean, we're going to be looking at an amount of money well over 200 billion by then. So, we should see more invested in infrastructure. We should see more in private equity. I think we need to, look at alternative investments. I think there is longer dated investments and assets align quite well with KiwiSaver and the long-term horizon of investors. I think we probably should have had the compulsion debate or discussion or the referendum or however you want to frame that, because I think it seems like people are open for that. I think we will have addressed the contribution rates and with technology these days, why we locked into these fixed rates we have. It could be any amount, as small as you like, because every bit helps. And I think people will be talking more freely about their money. And we already see that. The barbecue discussions pretty quickly moved to KiwiSaver for the younger cohort, but I think we need everyone to be thinking and talking more freely about their money and helping each other to achieve their retirement goals.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to that barbecue as soon as we come out of lockdown. Riz, your take on the topic? 10 years time.
I'm definitely that person at the barbecue that's talking about KiwiSaver. 10 years time, I think I'd like to see less of a gap, or ideally no gap, when it comes to gender and KiwiSaver. I think that's something that I feel very strongly about. I'd love to just see more people, to Murray's point, more people talking about it, just in everyday conversation. I'd love to see more people engaged, and just like Sharesies has sort of triggered this real interest in investing. I don't see why that. I mean, KiwiSaver is an investment after all, so I don't see why that can't be a part of that as well. I think, to Nigel's point as well, like the financial literacy side of things, it would just be great to see a lift in the number of people that knew, how much they needed to retire comfortably, and we're aware of how KiwiSaver works and what it is in general. So yeah, a lift in literacy and a narrowing of the gap when it comes to KiwiSaver. Yeah.
Thank you, Riz. And Helen, last word to you.
Here, Russ, on the narrowing of the gap across all forms of life. I agree with everyone on the points that are made. I think that 10 years' time we're going to have larger balances, and with that we'll have greater literacy. So I think it'll be far more exciting, the conversations that are going on. I'd like us to be further down the track when it comes to sustainably investing for our KiwiSavers into the future, for our industry to be thinking on a much longer term point from Murray's point of view from investment, but also looking at broader elements of what we're doing in the community and and social and governance elements. I think it'd be really interesting to see if we can get down the track. Like Australians, I think it's one of the supers, if not a couple now, that partner with research charities on things like looking into Alzheimer's and diseases that affect the aged more, because that's their business and that's what they're interested in. So 10 years' time is going to be a world of opportunity, I think, and a lot more engagement and really good debate like this.
That's awesome, and that's probably an awesome way to finish. So in finishing, let me say thank you to the panel for your awesome insight and expertise and joining. To the people on the other end of the line, really appreciate the comment, Michael. Awesome comments, thank you. There are a whole bunch of issues that emanate out of this particular topic, and that's why we call it KiwiSaver at the Crossroads, because it is about all the things we spoke about, but it's got about plenty more. We didn't talk about fees much. We didn't talk about sustainable investing and that whole world of climate reporting. That is a conversation we'll have on one of these sessions in a couple of weeks' time, so look out for that. But I do think it was designed as a debate starter and a trigger. To Nigel's earlier point, it's also designed as a starter for a policy discussion, and that's something that we'll obviously have with our various political partners and so forth. And it isn't easy, I suppose, is the answer. And there are a lot of pretty tough issues to negotiate and navigate. Interesting, some of the insight coming through in the comments from people in other jurisdictions where these issues have been kind of dealt with and sorted, and communities are supportive and so on. So I guess that's in front of us. And on that note, people, at 4:32, appreciate your time, appreciate your attention. Stay safe. Hopefully we'll get back to a more normal operating rhythm sometime soon. In the meantime, FSC Connect will be broadcasting as it is twice a week on topics of du jour and of note. If you want to join as a speaker, or you've got a topic you want to hear about, just let us know. Just contact Riss or Hayley, and we look forward to seeing you on the next session. And have a great afternoon. Bye for now.